You think you're in control. You think you're reading between the lines, catching the smirks, interpreting the silences. You believe you've grown smarter, more vigilant, that you've learned from past betrayals, that you're too aware to be played again. But the truth is, if a manipulator has chosen you, you're already inside their game. You're not the opponent. You're the board. Because manipulation doesn't walk through the front door. It seeps in, unnoticed, wearing your trust like camouflage. It speaks in familiar tones. It doesn't raise alarms. It lowers them. It doesn't steal your boundaries. It convinces you to hand them over. You don't lose to manipulators because you're weak. You lose because you still believe the fight is fair. A manipulator doesn't just use lies. They use your need to believe, your craving to feel understood, your hunger for stability, for kindness, for something that finally feels like home. They learn your emotional blueprints, where the cracks are, how deep they go, and they don't fill those cracks. They crawl into them. They make themselves the glue. You tell yourself you're safe because they haven't done anything bad, but you feel the confusion creeping in, the fog, the shrinking. You second-guess your reactions. You doubt your memory. You replay the conversation again and again, looking for proof that your discomfort is justified. But there's never anything solid to hold. Because that's the trick. They don't push you off balance. They slowly move the floor beneath you. Foucault said, power isn't held, it's exercised. It's invisible, embedded in the fabric of how we relate to each other. It's the shape of the room, the structure of silence, the unspoken rules we follow without even knowing. And manipulators are architects of this unseen architecture. They redesign your inner world without ever touching the walls. They never tell you what to think. They make you question what you already believe. They never tell you what to feel. They mirror your deepest wounds back at you until you mistake them for healing. They don't control your choices. They redefine your options until the path they want seems like the only one you'd ever take. You think you're playing chess, but they wrote the rules, they placed the pieces, and the board? It's been tilted since the start. It begins in the smallest ways, a comment that sounds caring but makes you hesitate, a moment where you feel guilt without knowing why, a pattern of being confused but afraid to say so, and over time the noise inside your head gets louder than their words ever had to be. That's how they win, not by overpowering you, but by rearranging the furniture in your mind so that even when they leave the room, you keep tripping over their presence. You'll tell yourself it's not manipulation because they're not yelling, not insulting, not threatening, but that's not the shape manipulation takes anymore, not in its evolved form. Now it shows up wrapped in concern, in flattery, in empathy so precise it cuts, sharper than cruelty ever could. They'll use your story as a script. They'll pretend to be your antidote while injecting more poison. And you'll thank them for it, because it will feel like care, because you've been taught to associate pain with growth, confusion with love, exhaustion with devotion. You think you're seeing clearly, but you're staring through the lens they handed you. And even when you start to suspect, you'll hesitate, because manipulators don't just isolate you from others. They isolate you from yourself. They wear masks, yes, but the real danger isn't what they hide, it's what they reflect, the parts of you you've buried, the doubts you've silenced, the fears you've tried to outrun. Manipulators don't forge chains. They offer mirrors and wait for you to tie yourself up. Even your resistance becomes a resource to them. They'll twist your attempts to set boundaries into signs of selfishness. They'll turn your silence into a weapon, your rage into proof, your escape into betrayal. You can't win because the rules aren't logical, they're emotional, and emotion is where they do their best work. You try to explain, to argue, to reason, but you can't out-logic someone who's playing a different game. They don't need to be right. They just need to make you wrong long enough that you surrender the argument before it begins. Sometimes you'll catch glimpses of the truth, but They'll come wrapped in guilt. You'll feel like the bad one for even questioning it. That's how far they've reached into your psyche. You'll apologize for the wounds they inflicted. You'll defend the person who disassembled you piece by piece because they made you believe you're safest in their presence, even when your body is screaming to leave. This isn't about being naive. It's about being human. Manipulation thrives not because people are foolish, but because people are wired to connect, to trust, to bond. And the manipulator doesn't break that wiring, they hijack it. They'll convince you that you're the lucky one, that what they give you is rare, that no one else will understand you the way they do, that everyone else is a threat, a distraction, a danger to this special connection. But that specialness, it's the leash. It's the collar made of compliments, and it tightens every time you believe them. Nietzsche once said, the most perfidious way of harming a cause consists of defending it deliberately with faulty arguments. That's how manipulators ruin love. They make you defend a version of it that hurts you. So when you finally leave, you're not just broken, you're cynical. You don't even trust your ability to love anymore. That's the deepest theft. Not your time, not your energy, but your capacity to feel safe in your own emotion. They don't just manipulate outcomes, they manipulate meanings. They turn the word love into a contract. They redefine support as obedience. They morph loyalty into silence. And slowly, your language, your inner dictionary, starts to serve their interests. They'll say things you swore you'd never say, tolerate things you once couldn't even imagine. Because they don't push you into betrayal. They make betrayal look like protection. They don't demand submission, they frame it as maturity, as compromise, as what relationships take. So no, you can't outmaneuver a manipulator. Not with logic, not with love, because they're not fighting to win. They're fighting to redefine the game in their image. And the moment you start playing, you've already lost a part of yourself. But here's what they fear, not confrontation, not exposure, not your anger. What they fear is your clarity. They fear the moment you stop explaining, stop justifying, the moment you sit quietly and realize that love should never need to be decoded, that care should never confuse you, that safety should never feel like a riddle you're failing to solve. What they fear is your stillness. When you finally stop reacting to the chaos they stir and start noticing how peaceful life is without their influence. What they fear is your refusal to play. And maybe that's the only true way to win, not by outmaneuvering them, but by stepping off the board entirely and reclaiming your name, your narrative, your mind. You don't beat a manipulator by confronting them with fire. You beat them by extinguishing the need to explain yourself, by withdrawing your emotional fuel. Because a manipulator doesn't crave your love. They crave your uncertainty, your performance, your endless effort to prove you're good, loyal, kind, whatever they've conditioned you to think they deserve. They want your devotion to feel earned, but never complete. They want you always reaching, never resting. Always doubting, never grounded. Because a grounded person is dangerous. A grounded person sees clearly. A grounded person doesn't play games, they walk away from them. Every manipulator masks a fear they can't face, a hollowness they hide under charm or wisdom or fragility, and they need others to carry that weight for them. That's what they want from you, your energy to keep their delusion alive. And when you step back, when you stop trying to fix, to appease, to rescue, their illusion begins to crack. They'll panic, not because they miss you, but because they miss the control. They'll come back sweeter, softer, more themselves than ever. Not because they've changed, but because they know your emotional patterns better than you do. They know what you're starving to hear, and they'll say just enough to hook you again, just enough to make you question everything you just learned. And in that moment, your silence becomes your strength. Because the trap isn't their behavior, it's your hope. The hope that this time they mean it, that this time they see you, that this time will be different. But it won't be, because the game doesn't change, just the bait. Foucault argued that where there's power, there's resistance. But the resistance that works isn't loud, it's quiet, it's internal. It's the refusal to be defined by someone else's lens. The refusal to let their version of you become your truth. That's your way out, not through confrontation, but through unlearning. Unlearning the reflex to explain yourself when you feel misunderstood. Unlearning the guilt that rises when you say no. Unlearning the belief that someone else's peace depends on your discomfort. Unlearning the idea that being needed is the same as being loved. You have to remember who you were before they rewrote your story. Remember what certainty felt like, what ease felt like, what your instincts sounded like before they were drowned out by doubt. You have to become fluent again in your own emotional language. Because that's what manipulation steals most. Your voice, not just what you say to others, but what you say to yourself in the dark. In those quiet hours where the mask slips and your nervous system whispers the truth that you don't feel safe here. That love shouldn't hurt like this. That you're not crazy, you're conditioned. And once you hear that whisper, everything begins to shift. The fog starts to lift. The confusion starts to feel suspicious, not self-inflicted. The questions you kept swallowing start rising in your throat, not because you're ready to confront them, but because you're finally ready to confront yourself. You'll grieve, not just the manipulator, but the version of yourself who needed them, who stayed, who tolerated, who confused crumbs for care. And that grief will feel unbearable, but it's also sacred, because it means you're waking up. You're learning what your boundaries sound like when they speak for themselves. You're learning what real affection feels like, how it doesn't manipulate, doesn't destabilize, doesn't make you choose between being loved and being free. You're learning that healing isn't always loud or brave. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stop trying, to stop fixing what was never yours to repair, to stop performing worthiness for people who never saw it in the first place. The manipulator thrives on your performance, but your healing thrives in your rest. Let that rest be radical. Let your silence be terrifying. Let your peace be unrecognizable to those who only knew how to find you through your chaos. And one day you'll look back not at what they did, but at who you became in spite of it. Not hardened, not bitter, but clear, unshakable, whole. Because you didn't outmaneuver them. You transcended them. You became unplayable, and that's the one move they'll never see coming.